Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
And today we're talking about culture. Now, of course, culture is about certain countries and the way they do things in life, the songs they sing, the artwork they produce, and the games they play. And today we've got a game that's played in China and in Taiwan here, mahjong. But you might be surprised to know that mahjong is not only played in Chinese societies, but other people play it as well. How could that be?
It's fun. I guess I learned how to play mahjong a long time ago, but then when I was living in New York, I got to play it several times because one of my best friends, until she was 13, she lived in Taiwan. We would get together and have hot pot and play this with her friends. It's fun. I'm not very good at it, but it's a lot of fun. We're going to talk about mahjong today.
That's what we're going to talk about, but especially in different communities in the United States.
Cool.
So we'll talk exactly what that's all about here in just a couple of seconds. So let's get to it. Let's read the entire contents of our lesson now one time.
Every Chinese New Year in Taiwan, you can walk by houses and hear the noise of tiles clicking against each other. This is the telltale sign of an ongoing game of mahjong, the popular Chinese pastime that's become a common family tradition during the New Year week. However, mahjong's popularity is not limited to the Chinese cultural sphere. It's also played in non-Chinese cultures in the U.S. and has become part of the story of the melting pot of immigration. In the 1920s, mahjong became hugely popular among Jewish American communities. As in Chinese American groups, it provided a social activity around which to forge lasting friendships. For non-Chinese, mahjong was advertised as a game of skill, with an exotic allure. Though the fad eventually died off, it retained at least some of its fan base, and was known in later decades for being played by Jewish mothers and grandmothers in their free time. These groups appreciated mahjong because it was an important piece of community identity, even in an environment that was not always friendly to immigrants. But mahjong also helped people navigate the uneven terrain within their own communities as well. Players from different levels of society could compete against each other at the mahjong table, where a social atmosphere and the importance of skill help break down barriers between generations or social classes. Mahjong's popularity has persisted, and it's even come back into vogue among modern Jewish American families. While its association with older women meant it was perceived as unfashionable for younger people at first, a new generation of Jewish women has begun reconnecting with the game as a way to remember their mother's traditions. It's clear that Taiwan is not the only place where the clicking of mahjong tiles calls up beloved memories of time spent with family.
Okay, let's get into it now. It's our unit on culture, and we're talking about mahjong. That, of course, is the local pronunciation here in Taiwan and in Chinese communities throughout the world, unless you're speaking a dialect or something. I don't know how to say mahjong in Taiwanese, for example, or Cantonese or whatever.
I don't either.
But here in Taiwan, I think we just say mahjong. But I did want to mention that if it's played in the U.S., you'll oftentimes hear people calling it mahjong, okay, which they do with like Beijing or something. They always put the zh sound in there on certain Chinese words. So be ready to hear that if you happen to be in New York playing a game with some Jewish people or something like that. Mahjong. But we're going to say mahjong here because that's the way we're used to pronouncing it here in good old Taiwan. But it does have this long-lasting popularity in the U.S. It has been in the United States, and it has been popular in certain communities for quite some time. So here in the first paragraph it says, every Chinese New Year in Taiwan, you can walk by houses and hear the noise of tiles clicking against each other. So yes, mahjong is played with these things called tiles, those little pieces. They're rectangular in shape, and they're usually green on the back. Sometimes they're red or different colors. I guess it depends. But those are called tiles. And when you're playing, of course, these tiles will be clicking against each other. So yeah, you might hear this during Chinese New Year quite frequently.
I also think it's kind of cool, the people who are really good at this game, the way they hold the tiles, and flip them and stuff. I can't do that. I'm not very good at it. But yeah, there's a certain clicking sound. Tiles is a word we also use, guys, to talk about our floors sometimes are in squares. Those are tiles, or there are tiles on the roofs of some of the buildings here. Yeah, but these tiles are what you actually hold in your hand and play with. So it's kind of fun to hear that clicking sound. Now, this clicking sound is the telltale sign of an ongoing game of mahjong. This word telltale is hard to say because the vowels are actually different, tell and then tail. But Americans are really lazy, so we just say telltale. We make the same vowel sound for both those words if we are just speaking, casually. It just means something that's clearly obvious to you. It reveals something or it indicates something. You know that something's going on. So the telltale sign is just that clicking. You know immediately, they're playing mahjong. So when I was here, the first time I was here in Taiwan many, many years ago, I could hear that sound. And then if I'd ring a doorbell sometimes, the clicking would stop. I guess it was illegal to have too many people in your house playing mahjong.
Or a stranger coming into the house kind of interrupts the atmosphere of the game.
Yeah, maybe they were thinking,
I remember my mother-in-law kind of complaining about that. You can't interrupt them when they're playing. It's a very serious business,
really?
etc., etc. And indeed, I should say that I really haven't heard the sound of tiles clicking against each other for many years.
I haven't either.
Yeah, after my mother-in-law passed away, she used to play it all the time with my wife's brothers and sisters and cousins and stuff like that. But since she passed away, hey, they don't play it anymore. But I guess it's still popular out there. And again, it's a popular Chinese pastime. A pastime, of course, is something you do to pass the time, to have fun. They often describe baseball as being the American pastime. And here in Taiwan or in China, it's a popular way to have fun, to pass the time away. It's a famous Chinese pastime.
Pastime. There's a famous phrase in America. America's favorite pastime is baseball. Supposedly, it's America's favorite sport. I don't think any of the sports are really popular right now. But yeah, it's a pastime. It's something you do with your free time that you enjoy. So it says here, though, mahjong's popularity is not limited to the Chinese cultural sphere. A sphere is just sort of an area. You could use sphere to talk about a globe, a map of the world that you can spin around. That's in the shape of a sphere, just a circular shape. But here we're talking about, just a group of people. It's not a real group of people. It's just like an area of interest for people or expertise. You could say cooking is in my wife's sphere, but here it's just where people have an interest. And here we're saying it goes outside just the Chinese culture, and other cultures have adopted this particular game as well, which I had never heard of before. It's very interesting. It's also played in non-Chinese cultures in the U.S. Remember, the U.S. is just a country filled with a lot of immigrants who have come from other parts of the world. Especially in the 1900s, we had lots of immigration happening then. And it's become part of the story of the melting pot, where you put a lot of different cultures together and they melt together to turn into a good old American. But this is the melting pot of immigration. Immigration is that action of moving from your country where you were born into another country to live there forevermore.
Yeah, immigration isn't really a big issue here in Taiwan, but it is in the U.S., and it's always an issue that affects elections every year. The policy of, say, the Democrats and the Republicans, there are different views on immigration. That's always a big feature of elections. But indeed, when you have people moving from one country to the other, that is immigration, okay? And it's been part of the story of this melting pot. I suppose, especially in cities like New York, when Chinese immigrants kind of rubbed shoulders with the Jewish people and stuff like that, and they kind of influenced each other. Chinese people started eating bagels, and Jewish people started playing mahjong.
Well, in New York City, in the lower part of New York City, that's where the Chinese immigrants would settle, but that was also where a lot of the Jewish immigrants would settle. So, yeah, they kind of shared parts of their culture among both of the groups. Is kind of cool. Now, in the 1920s, mahjong became hugely popular among Jewish American communities. So when you see these hyphenated nouns like this, Jewish, American, or they could be adjectives too. It just means it's a combination of both. The one that comes first is where they originally came from, and then the second word would be where they've settled. So these were Jewish folks from all over the world, actually. Sometimes they felt unwelcome in their own countries, and so they would move to America looking for more acceptance and freedom. So this is back in the 1920s, quite a while ago, and they settled together in the same kind of neighborhoods, actually, and it was lower Manhattan. That's where they were living. As in Chinese American groups, people who were originally Chinese moving to America, they're Chinese American. It provided a social activity around which to forge lasting friendships. Forge is a word you use typically when you're talking about making something out of iron, where you heat it up to where it's really hot, and then you can shape it into different shapes. For example, a horseshoe, you forge those in very hot heat. Here it just means you're putting together a friendship that will last forever, right? You forge those friendships sometimes through quite difficult circumstances. At the end of that difficult circumstance or trial or things you have to go through, you find that you'll be friends forevermore.
Yep, it's an activity that people can get together over. Like here in Taiwan, lots of people like to get together to sing karaoke or something, or to have a big meal together. Those are social activities, and people can make friends, and hey, even love can blossom. You might meet your sweet other at such an activity. But we'll continue talking about this in just a second, but please stay tuned and now listen to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学，大家好，我是 Patrick 老师。我们今天要一起学习的单元是 Unit 12。我们在作答篇章结构的时候，请同学要记得一个解题技巧：回填的句子要和前后文连贯，在文意概念上承先启后，前后连贯，文意通顺。我们一起来看到第一段。首先，请同学注意到题干第一题之前的句子，如果你听到 clink clang 这些麻将撞击所产生的声音 ，it's a telltale sign。什么是 telltale sign 呢？就是泄露出真相的。telltale 当作名词，表示告密者。好 ，the popular Chinese pastime 是麻将的同位语，它是一项非常受欢迎的华人的消遣活动。That's become a common family tradition during the New Year week. 在过新年的时候，大家常常会打麻将做消遣。好，第一题我们看到后面的句子 ，It's also played in non-Chinese cultures in the U.S. 前面讲的是华人打麻将，后面说的是在美国非华人也打麻将。从华人变成非华人，我们有所转变，需要转折语气。A, B, C, D 四个句子里面有哪一个句子有转折语气呢？好，答案应该是 B， 选 B。但是麻将受欢迎并不仅 局限于华人的文化圈。接着我们看到第二段第一句，在1920年代，麻将呢在美国犹太社区也相当受欢迎，如同在华人的社区里面 ，it provided a social activity around which to forge lasting friendships。麻将呢也提供了社交活动，方便大家可以建立长久的友谊。请同学注意，这里的 which 所代替的就是社交活动。Forge 这个动词有两个意思，在这里是建立的意思，当然 forge 还有另外一个意思也很重要，是伪造。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're talking about the very cool game of mahjong and how it's not only popular here in Taiwan and China, over here in Asia, it's also quite popular in the U.S. in some particular neighborhoods and around some communities. It's something that's really fun. I can see why people would like it. I thought it was fun the first time I played.
Although I should say, you probably shouldn't have Jewish people playing mahjong together with Chinese people, okay? I think they have different ways of playing it. They might play by different rules. I do have an example to illustrate here.
Okay.
My mother-in-law was staying at her son's house in New Jersey, and my wife's sister just happens to be married to a Jewish man.
Okay.
So to make a long story short, my mother-in-law got together with my sister-in-law's mother-in-law, basically, for a game of mahjong, and it just didn't work out.
Really?
Yeah, my mother-in-law said that, oh, Susan is so slow, and it just didn't work out. It was no fun playing with her, so yeah, I think it's probably going to be very difficult, at least based on that experience, for Chinese people and Jewish people to play mahjong together, but I'm sure they'll have a lot of fun in their own groups.
Yeah, but you're talking about speed. I'm very slow. And I can see how the people I was playing with some Taiwanese friends, they might get a little frustrated. But we played the same. I was just very slow. So I think your mother-in-law played so much, she got really fast at it. So we're talking about how mahjong's got a long-lasting history, or it's now has a long-lasting popularity in the U.S. We're also talking about these groups that were immigrants. They came from their native lands and moved over to America to live. So when we left you, we were talking about how non-Chinese who play mahjong, they think it's kind of cool because you need skill. You definitely need skill. I noticed that. And I didn't have enough time to practice. I think the more you practice, the better you are at this particular game. But it also had what they're calling an exotic allure. So if something's exotic, it just means something that you're pretty unfamiliar with. Usually it comes from another part of the world that you've never been to. And you just think it's so cool because it's this distant foreign land that has something that you're not familiar with. Allure is just sort of something that attracts people. So if somebody's alluring, that's an adjective. It just means they're very attractive. They're kind of mysterious. They're fascinating. And I think that's what non-Chinese playing mahjong thought of mahjong, that it was not only exotic, but it was kind of fascinating and mysterious.
Yeah, especially if you got the tiles with the Chinese characters on there, you know.
Sure.
Nanbei, Dongxi, stuff like that. Wan, all those different characters will seem very exotic to people in the United States who are not familiar with Chinese. Now, here in the next sentence, though, it does say, though the fad eventually died off, it retained at least some of its fan base and was known in later decades for being played by Jewish mothers and grandmothers in their free time. So it was a fad for a while. It was very popular in society, but the fad died off. Fads die off all the time. And However, though, it did retain some of its fan base. To retain means to keep something. In this particular case, it kept a small number of people who like to play mahjong, but, it's not very common in communities in the U.S. to see mahjong, but it's still there, played by mostly older people, older women.
Now, retain can also just be used to talk about something that you don't want to change or get rid of or discard. Maybe you want to redecorate your house, but you want to retain some of, the decorations that you had previously. So, yeah, it retained some of its fan base. And it still has a lot of fans in America. These groups appreciated mahjong because it was an important piece of their identity for their communities. Especially back then, they weren't always welcome, as some immigrants will find when they first move to a new country. Mahjong also helped people navigate or know how to get around the uneven terrain within their own communities as well. Terrain here is being used figuratively and not literally. Terrain usually refers to the land, the ground, whether it's rocky or smooth. But here it's just like what that neighborhood community was feeling like. It wasn't always welcoming to them. Players from different levels of society could compete against each other. That was unusual back then, especially in the early 1900s, when if you were in a higher social class, you did not ever become friends with a lower social class. It just wasn't done. In today's America, it's not quite the same. So there was a social atmosphere, and the importance of skill helped break down those barriers. Atmosphere is how a place feels. We're not talking about the atmosphere of the earth, about the oxygen and the gases. No, we're talking about how a particular place feels to you. That restaurant has a really warm and welcoming atmosphere. And barriers refers to things that prevent you from doing something. They're fixing the road. Guys, they'll put up those cones, those orange cones. That's a barrier telling you, no, you may not come through here. You can't proceed. So it's kind of like a fence or an obstacle that prevents movement, barriers.
So therefore, mahjong gave them the opportunity to socialize with each other. And here in the next paragraph it says, mahjong's popularity has persisted, and it's even come back into vogue among modern Jewish American families. To persist just means to continue. You might persist with somebody if they don't take no for an answer. Hey, I want a job at your company. Nope, I'm not going to take no for an answer. I'm going to persist. I'm going to keep asking you every day until you give me that job. Ooh, you're very persistent.
Yeah, that's a good quality to have. Don't give up. So while its association with older women meant it was perceived as unfashionable for younger people at first, a new generation of Jewish women have begun connecting with the game as a way to remember their mother's traditions, which is fun. Association is often used to talk about an organization, right? But not here. We're using it with a different definition. It just means a connection or a link with something else. Peanut butter has an association with jelly and honey in America as a sandwich, peanut butter and jelly. Here, we're saying that older women had this link with mahjong. But younger people are, they're more and more they're wanting to learn more about their parents and their grandparents' traditions, which is great. So it's making these young people seek out mahjong to learn more about this game. It's clear, though, that Taiwan is not the only place where that clicking of mahjong tiles calls up beloved memories of time spent with family. If you call up something, it just means you recall. A memory comes back into your mind from long ago, and you think about it, so it's kind of cool.
It is kind of cool, and you can still play mahjong, and I'm sure all of you had great fun playing mahjong in the Chinese New Year that just passed us by. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation. It's time now to listen to our beloved Chinese teacher.
第二段这里告诉我们，在美国人当中，犹太社区也有人会打麻将。同学看到第二题，可能会很直觉的想要选 C， 因为 C 有 Jewish American， 但是我们看一下前后文，第二题后面 Though the fad eventually died off， 虽然这项潮流最终还是终结了， It retained at least some of its fan base， 还是保留出至少一部分的所谓喜欢麻将的人。我们看，如果我们选 C， 麻将仍然到现在还是很受欢迎，甚至于在年轻一代的美籍犹太裔家庭当中再度风行，这样子就会有所矛盾，因此同学要注意，不可以选 C。 我们再看其他的选项，会发现前面说到在华人之外，其他人也会把麻将当作建立友谊的社交活动，所以我们选 A for non-Chinese。 对于非华人来说，他们把麻将打造成一种需要牌技而且带有异国风味的游戏。紧接着我们看到第三段，这一些不同的族群，他们之所以会接受麻将，是因为是一种族群的认同感，外在的环境对于移民并不是很友善。接下来是第三格的句子，我们再往后看，后面说到 Players from different levels of society， 社会当中有不同阶级的人 could compete against each other at the mahjong table， 可以在牌桌上互相较劲。第三格前面所讲的是在对外的环境，外界对移民不友善，而后面这个句子说，在同一个社群当中，他们不同的社会阶级可以在牌桌上面较劲。我们所选的应该是前面是对外的因素，后面应该是对内的因素。我们选择 D，But mahjong also help people navigate the uneven terrain within their own communities as well. D 的意思是，麻将呢，其实也帮助同一个族群的人可以克服他们社区当中的人际障碍。接着往下，我们看到第四题，接着第四题后面的句子，虽然麻将常常呢跟比较年长的妇女联想在一起，很多人会认为这并不流行。 It was perceived as unfashionable. Perceived 就等于 consider， 只不过 consider 后面不需要加上 as。 那这里我们看后面呢，年轻人会觉得麻将并不流行，前面应该要放什么句子呢？应该要放剩下唯一的选项，麻将呢到现在为止还是有人在玩，甚至于在现代的美籍犹太裔家庭当中非常的受欢迎，再度受欢迎。 That's all for today. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our lesson for today. Thanks so much for joining us, and make sure you join us again next time for another edition of our program. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
See you.